I'm Lloyd Holiday, and this is the Cost of a Thing podcast. Thanks for listening in today. So what happened to that great standard of living that we used to enjoy here in America in the 1960s and even into the 1970s? Well, that's what the Cost of a Thing podcast is all about. Okay, what I'd like to talk about today is something that I call free money zones. And what I mean by a free money zone is an area where a lot of money flows in to that area that was never worked for. It's either fake equity that was created from stocks or real estate, an area where the real estate prices have been pumped up and there's all this fake real estate equity in there that came from nowhere. Or there may be some tax dollars flowing into that area that are being borrowed. The government's borrowing. So lots of free money is in that area that was never worked for. Nothing was really produced for that money, and yet it's there. And for me, these are your worst standard of living areas. This is where you're going to have the worst standard of living if you're just a regular working guy, working at a regular job, trying to make it in life, trying to start a family. You don't have a big inheritance, or you don't have, parents aren't funding you, subsidizing your rent and so forth. A regular guy that's on his own, trying to work and make it. Free money zones, you're going to end up with a low standard of living in those areas. And a lot of people are in that position. The main thing that happens in these free money zones is that all this free money coming in drives the price of housing very, very high. So you're working there making a regular wage. Maybe you're making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, an average wage for a person. And the houses there can be $1 million or $500,000, and you're making $50,000 a year. Well, that house is 10 times your income or 20 times your income. And these are just average houses. And we know where these areas are. Some of them, there's lots of them. I would say, San Francisco area, the Silicon Valley, even Los Angeles, New York, Boston, some of these areas. We have these super high housing prices, and all this free money is flowing into those areas, and that's what's driving these house prices really high. And that's what leads the average guy that lives there and makes an average wage have a very low standard of living, because you can't get a decent place to live for a decent price. Okay, so where does this free money come from? And one of the ways it flows in is from overvalued, government-propped, government-manipulated stock prices. And that's what the government is doing now routinely, is making sure stock prices are very high. We have some of the highest valuations of stock prices in history right now. A lot of people are calling it a big bubble, an extreme bubble. I sure do. Many of the stocks now, in fact, most of them are 5 times, 10 times, even 100 times their real book value or historical value. And that means all that free money that was inflated, that they inflated the value of these stocks, and now the owners of that stock have access to that money, even though it's not really money that anything was ever done for. Work was not done for it. It just inflated that money to them. And now they can take that money and they can buy other stocks and drive those prices up. They can buy real estate, drive those prices up, whatever else, gold, any kind of asset they want to buy. Antique cars, artwork, they buy all kinds of stuff, and it drives all these things up in price. And another big way that overpriced stocks brings money into areas, free money, is that the corporations that are based in that area or have a factory or a building where they have their headquarters or a lot of employees, their rising stock value is income to that company because they usually own a large portion of the stock, a percentage of the stock. They might own 50, 60% of the stock. So when the price goes up, they get that money. And a lot of the employees that they have are paid with that money from their rising stock. It's not, they don't even pay them from products that they're making or services that they're giving. They pay them with this rising stock value. And then that money gets into the community, into the housing markets of the area, the rent markets, and that's what drives those prices high. I've done a whole podcast on the stock market super ripoff and explained it in a little more detail. And that is podcast number 22, the stock market super ripoff. If you want to know more about that, what I had to say about that, you can watch that or listen to that podcast. Another way free money flows into these areas is through overpriced real estate. Prices of the real estate rise, and then people can borrow that money out of those houses, and they can buy other houses with that money. They can buy rental units with that money. They can spend it on other things. They can sell that house and get all the money. Say the house went from $200,000 to $500,000 in that area. The house didn't improve at all. It's the same house that was worth $200,000 just a year or two before, or a few years before. Now it's $500,000. So there's an extra $300,000 available to tap into. People use their houses as ATM machines, and they do that. So that's another way that free money flows into these areas. And you'll notice that all these free money areas have very high real estate costs and rents. And of course, that's one reason the standard of living is low there for the regular guy. Another way that free money flows into these free money zones is through the government directly. The government borrows huge amounts of money every year, at least $1 trillion for the last 8 or 9 years or so. And that's projected to go on well into the future, 30, 40 years out. So they borrow this money and then they spend it into an area. Now, a lot of these free money zones have a lot of people on welfare. They have military bases. They have military contractors or subcontractors there. Or they just have direct government offices there, courts and other bureaucracies that free money, the printed money, gets pumped right into that area. And a lot of times those are in the big cities that are super expensive already. So that's more free money flowing in that way from the government. Another way free money flows into cities and these free money zones is foreign money comes in. A lot of times that comes from these trade deficits when we buy more goods from foreign countries than they buy from us. We run like $500 billion a year trade deficit. In other words, we buy $500 billion more worth of goods from the foreign countries like China and India, Mexico, than they buy from us. Then they have that money over there in their country. So that money can then come back into our country and buy real estate. It can buy businesses. It can buy any asset that we have over here. And a lot of times that money flows into these free money zones because they're in desirable areas near the ocean or, in a nice climate zones in California and near the cities in New York and popular areas. And that money flows in there. And then the working guy has to compete with that foreign money coming in too. So, and that drives those prices of houses higher, and it diminishes the value of your money if you're working at a regular job here in the United States. And there you go, lower standard of living right there. So a lot of dollars are coming into these free money zones. Nothing is really being produced to create those dollars. The money is either being borrowed or printed by the government or created through some stock inflation or real estate asset price inflation. And what that does is reduce the average working man's standard of living, because now his money that you get and I get from doing real work, producing things and services in the economy, now has to compete with this free money to buy things. And it just dilutes the value of your money that you get from work. It's like if there was a bunch of counterfeit money thrown into the system, and then now you have your money you get from work has to compete with this counterfeit money to buy things. So you're not going to get as much for your money. You're not going to get as much for your work. And that is why these free money zones are bad. So in my life, I have tried to avoid free money zones. And of course, it's hard for young people to see that they're in one of these places if it's all they've known. But what you look for in these areas, the symptoms are glaring, are going to be super high housing prices, super high real estate prices, and the corresponding super high rent prices. I mean, some of these areas, as I've talked about, houses can be 10 and 20 times the average person's wage there. This is the average house. It can be 10 to 20 times the average person's wage there. So if you're making $50,000, the average house might be $1 million. Well, you can't buy that. It's out of your range. And then rent might be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month. Well, how can you afford that on $50,000 a year? So your standard of living suffers. Those people wind up in like a roommate situation. Some may even wind up homeless, and you'll also see homelessness will be exaggerated in these areas too, because there's a lot of people that fall off the end. There used to be areas where, low-income people, poor people could get a place to live, be the poor side of town. Well, now even the poor side of town's too expensive, so they just fall off the wagon and wind up on the streets, and you see this massive homelessness that's going on in a lot of these areas now. So during my life, I looked for areas where there was mostly real money that was created in the local economy and the real economy. Real products were produced for that money, and not a lot of free money was there. And that is where your best standard of living is going to be. So that when you get your paycheck, it's going to not have to compete with a bunch of free money that somebody got for doing nothing. And you're going to go out there and get a good price for a house and a good value for rent. And those are out there. You have to look for those. And what I would look for in those areas is the average house in that area should cost about 2 to 3 times that average income. And then you're getting a good value. There's not a lot of free money around speculating and driving those prices higher. That's what I look for. 2 to 3 times the average income. And that's what it used to be in the 1960s. That's what houses in most places, price of an average house would be 2 to 3 times the annual income of the average worker in that area. And that's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. If you're paying more than that, it's probably in a free money zone. Oh, and I kind of use San Francisco and San Jose area, Silicon Valley as one of the worst examples. Maybe Manhattan Island, maybe downtown Boston area for these high-priced rents and so forth. Well, if you're going to live in those areas, you better take, even if you're just going to live there for a while and rent an apartment. Well, a nice apartment in those areas probably can be up to $3,000 a month. And, even for that, you might get the apartment out of the old, remember the old Dirty Harry movie with Clint Eastwood when he lived in San Francisco as a cop back in the movie Dirty Harry. You saw that apartment he had there. That's probably $3,000 a month for that. I mean, it's an old crummy apartment. You're not going to get something fantastic for that. even for that price. And the old standard for rent, percentage of your income, rent should only be, and housing should only be about 25% of your income. So if you're paying $3,000 a month, well, you better be making $12,000 a month. And then you can afford that one-bedroom apartment for $3,000. You know, $12,000 a month is $144,000 a year, approximately $150,000 a year. Well, you can afford a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco then on that. But most people don't make that much money down there. I'm sure a few people do. Some of them do. But to buy a home there, I would guess you're going to have to make double that. So maybe you have to make $300,000 a year. And there's very few people making that kind of money, even in San Francisco. And I'm using San Francisco as an example, but there's many cities like this: Manhattan, areas of the Northeast, Boston, even other cities that are not commonly thought of like that are super overpriced like that now. And what they have, and why I use them as an example, San Francisco, it's a financial district. So it's got that stock money, that fake stock money flowing in. It's got all of these things that I just talked about. It's got overpriced bubble real estate. It's got a lot of government money flowing in there. It's a government center. There's a lot of people on welfare there, getting free money and free rent subsidies and free food and all these things like that. And San Francisco is also one of the worst examples of a free money zone because it's got a lot of companies that have super overpriced stock, and that free money is flowing in from that overpriced stock value. And like I said before, it's paying their employees. They may not even be making a profit yet, but they're getting money from that stock value being bubbled up. And there's a lot of those tech companies centered in that San Francisco area and Silicon Valley, paying their employees. They're making investments with this inflated stock that might be 20, 50, 100, 200 times what it really should be worth. And that money's flowing in there into that area, really super pumping up the prices. And on top of that, it's got a lot of foreign money flowing in there. They like San Francisco. It's a trendy area. It's near the ocean. It's attractive to foreigners. It's an attractive area. They know about it. They've heard of it. It's very famous, and they want to be part of that. So they want to get some real estate there. So if you're a working guy and you're working there, you're working at Starbucks, and maybe you got 2 or 3 jobs, and you're getting $40,000 or $50,000, $60,000 between them, working, your tail off. You can't get anything. All this free money is coming in, and you're competing with that, and you're not going to get a house. They've got the houses locked up. They're $1 million. They've got the rent jacked up. The owners buy those places, and then they jack that rent up to correspond to that high price they paid. So you're going to pay for that. So you're going to probably wind up on those salaries living in a multiple roommate situation. And you're not going to get ahead. You're never going to be able to save money there. The rent and the costs of the housing, even if you're in a roommate situation, that's probably $1,000 or more a month just for sleeping on the couch or having a little 10 by 10 bedroom. And that rent just vacuums up. It just sucks up all your extra money. And you barely will have enough to live, much less try to save money for your future to get ahead, so you can get out of that and get a place of your own in the future and live a very nice standard of living. It just keeps you down. And while I'm on the subject of trendy areas, there are areas out there that are not financial centers and areas where there's lots of government money flowing in, but they're trendy areas. The wealthy people that get this free money, and they have other money, maybe they have large incomes too, they go to these trendy areas. I'll name a few. Lake Tahoe, you got Jackson Hole, Wyoming, some of the ski resort areas, There's not a lot of jobs or whatever in those areas, except for maybe people working in the tourism industry there, working in restaurants or bars or hotels. And you're not going to make a lot of money in those areas, in those trendy areas. Well, number one. And number two, because all those people find it a trendy area, they buy houses there. They buy it up. They think it's going to go up in value more, and they buy it as a lot of times as a speculation, or they want a second home there. Maybe a person living in San Francisco wants a second home up in Lake Tahoe. They buy it all up. So that jacks the price sky high. You're working there in that area as maybe you're a bartender. You're maybe making $50,000 a year as a bartender, and you can't no way buy a house there in Lake Tahoe or Jackson Hole. Much less, you can barely pay the rent. The rents are sky high there too. So then again, you're in that multiple roommate situation that is really a very low standard of living, and you can't get ahead because even that's expensive, and it's sucking up all your money that you might save for your future. Loretta Lynn, her song Coal Miner's Daughter, there's a line in that song that talks about her father worked as a coal miner to earn a poor man's dollar. Well, what she was talking about, in my opinion, was that's a real dollar. It was worked for. It was worked hard for. A product was produced for the money the coal miner got. He produced some coal and that somebody got some good use out of. And you have people in this world that aren't doing anything for money, and they're not working for that money. It just flows to them through asset price inflation and things like that. What you want to be in is an area where real money is there and not a lot of free money is floating around there. So I'm going to wrap this up today, and so the answer to that question I asked at the beginning, what happened to that great standard of living we enjoyed here in America in the 1960s? Well, one of the things that caused our standard of living to decline to where it is today is these free money zones. With all that free money flowing in there, and then your money that you get from work has to try to compete with that, you're going to have a lower standard of living there. So what I look for is an area where most of the money in the area is gotten by real work, where a real product was produced. People are working at factories. They're producing either oil or wood or some kind of real product that people need and use. And that will result in you having a good standard of living in that area. Try to stay out of the free money zones and live in the real money zones. A good standard of living is about what you can get for the money that you earn from your job, from your work. How much can you get for that money? And in these free money zones, you're not going to get much for your money, as I've talked about, because of all this free money flowing in there, and it's competing like counterfeit money for the goods and services that you need to buy with the money you get from your job. And that's why, if you're a regular working guy in those areas with a regular salary, you're not going to live a very good standard of living there. You're not going to be able to save for your future like you should be able to do. Thank you for listening in today. And until next time, this is Lloyd Holiday signing off.